you can do, every step strategically in the hiring process, extend an offer and they decline, extend an offer, they accept, and then get offered something else. And they, renege and say they're going to go with this, or a family situation changes. Like there are so many variables I've seen take place. And so I think sometimes, as important as hiring is, we overthink it.
Welcome to Offer Accepted, the podcast that elevates your recruiting game. I'm your host, Shanon Ogborn. Join us for conversations with talent leaders, executives, and more to uncover the secrets to building and leading successful talent acquisition teams. Gain valuable insights and actionable advice from analyzing cutting-edge metrics to confidently claiming your seat at the table. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of Offer Accepted. I'm Shanon Ogborn, your host, and this episode is brought to you by Ashby, the all-in-one recruiting platform empowering ambitious teams from seed to IPO and beyond. I'm super excited to have Nate here today. Nate is a talent acquisition consultant with a diverse background in startup and big tech environments. He's known for advising industry leaders on scaling teams through strategic growth and efficient processes. He previously led recruitment as head of talent at a startup and advanced from recruiting leader for data science and machine learning teams at Lyft. Nate's key achievements include redefining recruitment processes, reducing costs by insourcing, and implementing new technologies. So great person to have insights from. Nate, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Shanon. Appreciate it.
I know that I just kind of gave a little bit of background sort of overall, but can you give our listeners a little bit of background on yourself and sort of what your current work is?
Yeah, so currently, I've been fortunate actually to be pretty booked and busy with 3 startups. So I've been working with them the majority of this year on a fractional basis. So embedded head of talent, essentially helping them, of course, fill some roles is the main priority, but also I've implemented 2 ATSs, so configuring it, administrating that, sort of keeping the data clean, also partnering with the founder, of course, to try to help them better understand what some of their hiring needs may be, compensation analysis. So pretty much everything that touches TA, I try my best to sort of take off the plate, but I stop at like any sort of HR, ER duties. I gotta put a hard stop there. I don't, I don't try to drift in the waters I'm not comfortable with.
Totally. Well, you have so much interesting background in startups and in tech and in recruiting. In your work with startups more recently in particular, have you noticed any pain points of areas that could be improved in the recruiting process, or any areas that you've said, okay, now that I'm working a lot with startup founders, like this is something that really stands out to me?
Yeah, it's been quite a few. I've talked to colleagues a lot about just the market in general and just how it's so different from, depending on how long you've been in recruiting. For the most part, recruiting has been pretty much the same. You find candidates, you interview them, you hire. Sometimes the market changes a bit. Usually it swings in the favor of candidate versus employer. Right now, I don't know, like it's kind of a draw. All founders that I'm working with or are familiar with are usually, every single hire needs to be this A+ player that's checking all the boxes and then some, who fits within the budget, who can start right away. So it's this wish list that they're trying to fulfill that just isn't realistic in today's market, just because that A player is usually going to sit tight until something that is almost silly not to accept comes knocking at their door. And so I always try to make sure founders understand, just like a candidate, you got to understand what your value is. And also like, what are you offering these A players? Like what's going to be your carrot to pull them out of their very comfortable seat, where since they are an A player, they're being successful, they're a high performer, they're on path to promotions. You're essentially trying to disrupt that. And so what are you offering? And it needs to be usually like an expedited career progression path. And so I find oftentimes founders are wanting to hire these A players, but also wanting them to accept a lateral move and try to sell them on this great opportunity where honestly, they're already sitting in a great opportunity. And so I try to sort of let them know like, hey, you can hire this A player, but we're going to have to beef up this role or, increase budget or something along those lines.
Yeah. So in other words, trying to really get them to understand the alignment between the reality of what's out there, what the market is, and what they're looking for. I've found too, especially with startup founders, I love how passionate startup founders are. But I think one of the difficulties that I found working for startups sometimes is they expect everyone to absorb that passion and be that passionate just kind of up front, or feel so passionate about the project or the company just like they do, to where they're willing to take a lower salary, or they will lose some career trajectory just because they're so passionate about the mission. And I feel like what can be missed is not everybody functions that way as a candidate. That's not always the most important thing to a candidate. It's important to a lot of candidates, but that might not be the top one thing that they're really focused on. And so I feel like reaching that alignment could be a little bit difficult too.
Very difficult. And I try to watch my words, but essentially you're telling a founder, like, your baby isn't that cute as you think it is. Like, that could be a hard message to try to get across in a tactful way, but it's the truth. I mean, you're paying me to find you people because your ATS isn't flooded with the best of the best. Like, you need me to go out and intentionally, reach out to these individuals. And so trying to make them understand that just because you want something doesn't mean they want it. And then even finding individuals who check those boxes and then them being on the fence with moving forward with an offer because they don't see that passion or that offer, and they're curious, well, how long would this person stay? They stayed at the last startup 1.5 years. We need someone dedicated at least 3 years. And so you start to get into, a lot of those details around personality and behavior and trying to predict the future of the candidate. It can be a tough conversation to have because, again, like, I think to a founder, sometimes a recruiter giving that realistic feedback feels like a challenge to them. And it's just speaking from a very neutral, sort of unbiased position of, hey, I want you to win. I want your company to do great. And I want you to find a great person. But, the candidates aren't you. Like, they aren't the founder. They're just going to support your efforts and your vision. Like, you have to sort of humble yourself a little bit.
It's hilarious what you say about telling someone their baby. That cute. That's a perfect analogy. Well, I know that one of the things that we had talked about previously is sort of achieving that alignment through screening in versus screening out approach and philosophy. Can you walk through how this is important, or why this is important to get alignment with founders on that screen in versus screen out? Because some of what you're saying is like, it's just not possible to have all 5 of these things. So how do we screen them in versus try to screen them out? And what are the benefits sort of at large to implementing this philosophy amongst recruiting teams?
First, I would say the benefit is saving time and really recruiter sanity, myself included. Anything I say, I've usually experienced it, even if it's mistakes I've made on myself. And so that's why I like to talk about it. I've learned that most people are making a lot of the same mistakes. But when I first started consulting and, I got my first contract signed, and recruiters are already naturally people pleasers. And so we just, hey, give me the JD. I'm going to find your unicorn, your purple squirrel. Let me at it. I'm going to get it. so I sort of ran with it that way. And literally everyone I was coming back with, it was like, nope, I'm looking for 2 more years of experience. Nope, I want a better college degree. Nope, I want, to have this startup experience. Nope, but they also need some big tech. Like, it was just kind of everything that one thing that was missing. And whenever I try to, account for that and come back with another box check, it was like, well, this box isn't checked on this one. And so I found that it's important to align during that initial kickoff of, okay, you can have this wish list, but we need to, force rank what's most important to you and really make them think about, take away this skill set. Can this person be successful in this role? And once you start to get them to say they could, but okay, we're getting somewhere. This person can do this role without this particular, attribute or skill set or piece of experience. It's something they can learn. It's something someone else can coach them on, or they can develop over time. And so that's where you start to kind of chip away at that mentality of, I need to find the perfect candidate. And then I've also learned it's very helpful. You work with founders, but depending on what stage you are, how big teams are, founder usually has a lot of input, but there may be a different hiring manager. And so I really try to find like an ally that may be a little bit more aligned with the way I'm thinking about going about the hiring process, so that the founder is not just hearing this from me, but is hearing it from someone else, specifically someone who's considered to be a subject matter expert, that they can tell them, hey, this person will be a valuable asset to the company, even though they don't have X skill set.
Totally. And kind of taking a step back when thinking about screening in versus screening out, can you explain a little bit about what that means to you for people who haven't implemented that type of philosophy before?
Yeah. So screening in versus screening out is trying to get everyone online on the mindset of the candidates that we're speaking with, the candidates that we're spending time with. We're trying to find the value in them versus ways to reject them. Rejecting candidates is very easy. And I think oftentimes that's a go-to for a hiring leader or a founder to give themselves peace of mind and saying, well, I dodged a bullet. No, that person wasn't going to give me what I wanted. And let's just keep looking. Let's just keep looking. You can source forever, literally, if that's what you choose to do. I know several companies or, colleagues who said there have been roles open for a year and a half. Like, to me, like, that's ridiculous. If a role, one, if it's been open that long, you don't need it. Second, clearly you haven't defined what exactly this person needs to do, and or you aren't willing to pay that person to do it. It's usually one of those. And so getting everyone aligned on screening in is, let's look for, not just potential, but actually, what value and what experiences is this person actually going to bring, and what impact is that going to have today? I think oftentimes founders or hiring leaders get caught up in just forgetting the fact that if you have a role open, there's a hole in your organization somewhere that needs to be filled for a very specific reason. And I like to get them to think about, okay, like, how much time do you have to let this work go undone, or to stretch your team thin, and what that may, what domino effect that may cause. So what happens if you lose this one other person who's carrying all the weight for this particular department? Is that going to, tank your entire company? So you need to really start thinking about these things, and that good candidate may be, the perfect candidate for right now for what you need to get done, versus spending another couple of months trying to find a great candidate that we still don't know after we hire, what's going to happen. I think that's what oftentimes people forget about. You can do, every step strategically in a hiring process, extend an offer and they decline, extend an offer, they accept, and then get offered something else, and they, renege and say they're going to go with this, or a family situation changes. Like, there are so many variables I've seen take place. And so I think sometimes, as important as hiring is, we overthink it and think that if we spend so much more time and effort into doing it, then it's going to be perfect. And it just never will be, in my opinion. Let me throw that in there.
Totally. And I think it's worth noting that while there are some things like structured interviewing that predict job performance better than others, nothing predicts job performance 100%. When people say, like, I think I could find someone better, I think we should wait, you just have to evaluate what is the cost of that and what does that mean for your organization.
I completely agree. Again, I love, taking a self-assessment and just understanding where we are right now and what's needed in order to make progress, in order to push things forward. Like, sometimes a company may, have 2 years runway, and that's drastically being ate up because some work isn't being done, or, some type of position isn't filled, and that is a revenue generating role, or whatever the case may be. And so getting someone to start doing that work today would actually be more beneficial than finding someone that you feel is the right person 4 or 5 months from now.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance for sure, as is all things recruiting. But one of the things that you mentioned earlier was about a kickoff process that really gets this behavior set and aligned. Can you talk a little bit about what in a kickoff process for you would actually encourage this behavior and philosophy from founders, hiring managers, and honestly, even other recruiters? Because I know I've worked with recruiters who are like pretty stringent on who they're sourcing and bringing in, and they're actually missing out on a lot of quality candidates. And I feel like should be the facilitators of getting those candidates in the pipeline if they could potentially be a good match. So how do you start a kickoff process that really encourages that philosophy of screen in versus screen out?
I usually like to kick off with founders and really getting a better understanding of the history of hiring at that company, what challenges they may have had so far, what challenges they're having today, and really get a better understanding of, why am I here? It could just be cost savings. Like, maybe working with me is better than the agency, or whatever the case may be. But getting a better understanding of, again, their philosophy around hiring, the things they've tried, what has and hasn't working. Like I take note of all that before I kind of really dig into what type of candidate are we looking for? What are your non-negotiables? What are we talking about as far as timeline, compensation? Like I start to really kind of understand, because that puts me in the right mindset of how much, if any, change management is going to be needed. I think that's what it comes down to, because I've actually worked with some startups that was too loose with hiring. It was like, okay, like you need to do more than one interview for this head of. You might want to vet them a little bit further. And so it can go both ways. I think the majority of the time is trying to get a founder to loosen up, but sometimes I've seen where founders are just kind of so free when it comes to hiring and just thinks that, okay, now just get them in here, we'll figure it out. That can work when they're been hired onto a pretty well built out team with some good coaching and mentorship available. But if this person is laying the groundwork, you want to be a little bit more thorough, I guess, in vetting that individual.
Definitely. When you're starting these meetings, like let's just say you're starting from square one and you're working with a founder or a hiring manager and they're like, I have 20 requirements, like, which it sounds ridiculous, but we know that
Right.
happens. How do you talk to them about reducing sort of like the minimum qualifications versus the preferred qualifications? And I guess how many do you recommend? Like how many like very hard stop factors do you recommend a hiring manager has for a candidate they're looking for?
That's interesting. And I don't want to cop out, but it is very individualized. And I think I would take a very tailored approach to that type of situation. And it depends on the role, because that role, could be, the market could be flooded with those individuals, or it could be something very niche. What industry are we talking about? Has that industry been impacted by a lot of layoffs? Have they not? Has it been stable? All of these variables play a huge factor, because if someone's been in a very stable environment, I see them less likely to leave. That's going to, reduce your candidate pool versus something where, again, the market is flooded because the sector has been hit with so many layoffs, and you can kind of throw a rock and hit these individuals. That's going to help me sort of, measure how we sort of assess and qualify candidates. But I try my best, and hopefully, I'm successful at making sure founders keep an open mind. I love working with founders who are open to those exploratory calls. Like if I find someone who's in the industry, who's done this work, because sometimes a candidate could have like a very almost like confusing or scattered type of profile, but they're in the realm of what you're looking for. They may have a long career in startups, and so they've worn many hats, as they always like to say. And so I love to have those people talk to founders as well, because sometimes that helps the founder better understand what type of person they're looking for, even if it's not that person. And they can hone in a little bit more and come back to me with, okay, like I really need someone who can do this and this. And now we're a lot more calibrated, just because they've had a couple of conversations and they see that they can now be a little bit more specific because they've spoken with people has done similar work.
I always also found it helpful to present hiring managers with someone in the industry who's not necessarily in the market, but just willing to talk about their experience in that particular role, like of things that they would be looking for in a role. And I found that to be really valuable, because the person on the other end isn't necessarily like invested in saying whatever they need to say to get a job, but they're invested in lifting up their own industry and their own role, people in their own role. So I found that to be a really interesting avenue to helping hiring managers and founders understand, especially founders who you literally can't know everything about every role. It's impossible. Right. So who can you talk to in your network or in the recruiter's network who will say, hey, yeah, I've been in this industry, in this role for a long time, and here's what people get really excited about. Here's what people are really looking for. Like the salary expectation is way too low based off of probably more anecdotal, but sometimes when you do like the compensation analysis, it just doesn't line up with what people are really looking for to make a move. Because like you said, if there's a bunch of people in this role type that are stable and not a flooded market, then they're going to be less likely to move. So they're going to need to be incentivized to do that. So I always found that to be pretty valuable means there too.
Again, I love when a founder is just open to having those conversations. To me, like it just creates a better relationship between recruiter and founder as well. It's sort of it's a lot more collaborative. It's trust. It's not transactional. Whereas like, no, only send me people that can help me in what I need to be helped today. Like it's more of like, no, let me talk to them. Like I have some questions. It creates like a completely different type of dynamic to the relationship I've seen.
Any other tidbits on the kickoff process or kind of encouraging that philosophy that you've seen to really resonate with founders and hiring managers?
I mean, setting appropriate expectations around your capabilities and how quickly you feel you can start to present candidates, aligning on how those candidates will be presented. Again, these are all things, especially, start off my consulting career. I figured out as I went. A lot of it is very relevant to working with hiring managers internally, but consulting is a little different sometimes because, it's intentionally where I don't want to be overly involved in your day to day, or we shouldn't talk all day, every day. Like it should get to a point to where we connect as needed if there are things to talk to, but we kind of create this process of me sharing candidates, you reviewing and us collaborating to figure things out. And so just setting that up early and sticking to it, I think is beneficial. And then also I love to share candidates, in the screen in, screen out type of philosophy, share candidates that are spot on, but are way over budget, and just show like this person does it all. This is what the market rate is going for. Their response to that can tell you a lot as well. Are they just sort of writing that off as, oh, you showed me one person who's above market, like, oh, well, like no big deal. But you agree this person is exactly who you're looking for. So if we're finding people like this, why wouldn't they be operating in that same salary range and budget? And so I think even if they don't admit it, like it starts to plant that seed of you may need to compromise on some things as we move forward.
I think strategically pushing boundaries is such an important role for recruiters because, again, strategically, you don't just push boundaries for no reason. But like you said, it's like super telling if it's like, okay, I found you the perfect candidate. They're 2x the budget. It's like, oh no, we can't do that. It's like, okay, so now we need to take a step back and say, this is what it costs to hire this perfect person for the role, perfect in quotes for the role. But that's not achievable with the budget we have, which is okay, but we need to start taking things away that, maybe instead of 10 years of experience, we can bring someone in with 5 years of experience. So we have to adjust something because this is not realistic. So it sounds like you have a knack for getting people to that aligned place where where you're getting them to a realistic place.
The thing with me is that realistic place is a good place.
Totally.
I mean, I just hate sometimes I feel like a founder or a hiring leader is thinking I'm trying to get them to settle. And that's not what I'm doing at all. Like I promise you, like, I don't want to, give you, someone you feel to be mediocre to fill your role. Like I want you to find someone that, checks the majority of your boxes. But like with most things in life, you're just not thinking about this logically. And that's the thing. If you want this perfect person, give me an open budget. Like just talk to, the cream of the crop, like the people I bring you. If they're good, you're willing to pay them what they're asking for, but most don't want to do that. And so, okay, so you don't want the best person. You want the best you can get for this amount of money that you're willing to pay. That's where we need to sort of set the bar and make sure that we're, again, being realistic about this.
Yeah, and sometimes that makes sense. Like you don't always need someone with 10 years, 12 years of experience in a specialty. Sometimes what you really need is at least 5, and that's what your budget is. So then you probably are going to hire someone around 5 years of experience, not 10 years of experience. So yeah, it's all balance. It's all give and take. It all depends, like you said. I hate the cop out. It depends, but it really honestly does.
It does. It really does. And that's sort of at the root of the screen in versus screen out. Like we're looking at each candidate individually instead of we have this blueprint and just seeing, does that person match the blueprint perfectly? I feel like I'm far removed and most recruiters are, like I'm not giving you candidates that are just completely out of left field. Like there's something here. Now, whether that person, meets your standards of what you want, or you feel like you click with them, or they're going to have the capabilities. Okay, that's on you to assess further. But you can't tell me it doesn't make sense that I brought you this person. like this person clearly has the background and the experience that you're looking for.
Is there any better feeling though than bringing a hiring manager or a founder to this philosophy of screen in versus screen out, and then they hire one of the screen in candidates that wasn't quite the perfect match, and you're just like, see, it works. The system works.
It's tough to say that because if it goes the other way, it's like, oh man, like, but that's the thing. You never know until you get them in the role. But recruiters usually have a higher EQ. And so I think sometimes we can pick up on certain things. Like there have been times I've tried to convince hiring leaders that, hey, this person is going to work here until you don't let them work here no more. Like just because they have so much excitement, they're highly engaged with me. They're following up after calls. They're asking me to prep them. They're just so engaged versus the ones that are just kind of lingering. They'll respond to the email. They'll say, yeah, they'll take the call, but you can tell like their heart isn't in it. Not to say they wouldn't be a great candidate either, but those are things I try to point out to a founder as well. Like, okay, you can hire this person, or this person may be something you're very interested in. They're passively playing around with us. This person, without a shadow of a doubt, would accept our offer, come in and be able to make an immediate impact. It's weird. It's so weird dealing with people on all sides, because sometimes like a founder wants the individual who doesn't seem desperate or super interested. They want to feel like they won them over. And no, it's funny. It's funny all the different directions it can go in, and recruiters just try to manage it all and sort of spot when these sort of sticky situations pop up.
Yeah, the psychological games are definitely no fun. I think what's really cool about having, and helpful and impactful about having like high trust with recruiters and founders and hiring managers is they come to you and they say, how did this candidate treat you? Did they treat you well? Did they treat you like a real human being? Or did they treat you very transactionally, like the only thing you're good for is to like get me into this job? One of my previous CEOs would, when I was doing more like coordination, like recruiting ops work, every time we would get to the offer stage with a candidate, he would stop me in the hall when we were in the office, haven't been in the office in a while, and say, hey, like, how did this candidate treat you when you were booking them? Like, were they respectful? Were they kind? Were they grateful? And I would always give like a pretty straight up answer. And there were actually people who were like quite rude to me that I wasn't trying to like block them from getting a job, of course, but he like would ask me what I thought. And I said, yeah, like we had a little bit of trouble. Like he was like, okay, I think we shouldn't give this person an offer. So like, this is also a note to candidates. Like you got to treat everyone like with respect, because if you do have that high trust between founders and recruiting and talent, like that could be the difference between the person who gets an offer or not. So I love that aspect of building the trust with founders, especially.
Yeah, for sure. And to your point, I think all people should just treat people with respect.
100%. A lost art, apparently.
Yeah, like I've had candidates say some very nasty things to me after I, tell them they didn't move forward, or I'm, late responding to an email or something, whatever it may be. That's just like, calm down. Like it's
Totally.
overkill. Like it's just overkill. I'm like, why are you talking to me like this? And I find myself like I'll get mad for like 3 seconds and then I just calm down. I'm like, it's not that serious. Like that's them, not being able to check their emotions. And same thing internally. Like I've had hiring leaders and founders, get nasty about something, and it'd be the smallest thing, like, maybe the coordinator booked the wrong room or forgot to add a Zoom link. I'm just like, everybody, let's calm down. Like, why are we behaving like this? Like, it really usually isn't that serious. That's why I like recruiting, because it's very important to the company, but it's fun. Like it's just connections and networking and talking. So if we all can just keep it, at that level, it shouldn't be any reason for the rudeness, but that's just people. I don't
keep
know.
it calm, keep it cool, everybody. Keep it calm, keep it cool. Well, taking sort of like a huge step back, we talk a lot at Ashby about hiring excellence, and I always love to hear from our guests. When you hear hiring excellence, what does that mean to you?
Oh man, that's a good one. And I'm just a very tailored, individualized approach type person. And so when I think about hiring excellence, I think about putting together a process that works for that particular organization, that particular department, that team, really, diving in and understanding historical data of what's been successful or what hasn't been in hiring or recruiting that particular position, and really putting together a process that makes sense. And that's how many people are they speaking with? What sorts of questions are we asking? Are we going to do an assignment? What should the assignment look like? How much time should we dedicate to this? Usually, myself included, I'm guilty of this. Like, you create a good recruiting process, and then you try to apply that recruiting process to every role that becomes available with some tweaks here and there, but it's still like a very blanket, generic recruiting process that could work. But to me, excellence is creating those processes that, were tailor made for those particular roles.
I feel like you know that better than anyone too, especially having worked with data science and machine learning teams. Like, that requires a pretty niche specific process, and applying what you did for sales is just not going to work for
Right.
these very niche and hyper specific roles like data science and machine learning. It's just not.
One thing I've seen, become a barrier or a bottleneck, we'll call it, in the process, is not adjusting your process as the market changes or as things differ. A good example, when I was at Lyft, we recruited, the same way before the pandemic and after the pandemic, and things that kind of changed and shifted. And of course, Lyft was a very, a larger organization. And so there could have been pockets of change. But for the most part, what I saw, we were still sort of applying a lot of the same, with, of course, the exception of like going remote and things like that. But the recruiting process itself and sort of how we were assessing and identifying candidates stayed the same. Whereas I think sometimes we need to, again, kind of take a pause and assess, okay, like, how has things changed? What can we improve upon? And I get it. When you're recruiting, you're trying to push. You're trying to get people to that next stage. The thought to slow down and redo a playbook, create new scorecards, all that kind of stuff. It's just like, oh, I don't have time. I need to get these candidates through. And so I love, or let me say, rather, I miss having recruiting operations, because those were the things we can kind of hand off. They get worked on in the background. We come back together and boom, like, I didn't have to necessarily slow down too much. When you're a one person show, like, it's tough to juggle all of that. And you just kind of prioritize getting candidates through.
100%. Shout out to all the rec ops
Thank you.
people. You are my heroes. Okay, so last question. I feel like you have like a reasonable amount of hot takes on LinkedIn, but I would love to hear, what is your recruiting hot take?
Top of mind, recruiting, again, like, there just hasn't been much change. Like, we've implemented a lot more technology and a lot more sort of like tooling and automation, but the process itself hasn't changed much. I think interviewing is just trash and poorly done usually at most companies. And I say that because, just like we've discussed during this time, is there are so many variables involved. One thing I would like to see implemented more is giving candidates the opportunity to choose how they want to be evaluated, because a lot of us operate very differently. Case in point, I'm sure I've hired some bad candidates because they interviewed well. And I'm sure we've missed out on some candidates because they turned in a poor assignment, but with a little bit more time, a little bit more context, they may have killed that assignment. So it's just sort of, we use these interview processes and we make everybody run through the same process, almost like playing a sport. Like, you're a good athlete, but you're making everybody try out for the basketball team. Like, that's not the sport they're good at. They're a good athlete, but you can really see them shine if you were to give them a different assignment, or you run them through a different type of process. And so I think figuring out, like, how do we create these unique interview processes to where, like, we're actually seeing the best of every candidate and understanding what they'll bring to the table and what value. I especially hate when candidates don't get through just because I can tell they're nervous, they don't interview well, they lose their train of thought. It happens. Interviews are very, anxious types of situations. And so everybody, it's just, for some people, it's tough to navigate that. And that's really the only thing keeping them back because they have the skill sets. And so I think we need to revamp interviewing, as a whole. And I think that will provide a better candidate experience in and of itself versus making sure everybody gets feedback. I would rather go through a process where I feel like I was able to perform at my best based on what I know I'm good at versus getting, some constructive feedback on why someone else did better than me. So that's just me though.
Totally. It's the balance of the candidate experience with predicting job performance. And I think setting candidates up for success is just inherently going to get you to a place where you can better predict job performance because of all the reasons you're saying. Obviously at scale, that's really hard.
Right.
So I think it's something to work on, but hopefully you can come back in a bit and hopefully you've made some changes there and you can inform us on how you did it, because I think what you're saying makes total sense. And at the end of the day, like, this is a human to human role and capacity, and we should be treating it more that way.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we all know the people who get hired because they know the right person. And so if that person can get hired just because they have the right connection and skip the entire interview process, that's why I say it's broken. Like, there's no way you can tell me that this person, you don't mind paying them $200K a year because you know them or know someone who knows them and you just trust that connection versus this person, completed an assignment. It wasn't perfect, but it was good. To me, person B deserves the role just as much. But I mean, those are those factors. That's the way the world works. Like, I understand that, but I just wish there was something more we could do to, like I say, give people the opportunity to show up as their best selves during the interview process.
I think that as recruiters, we just continue to plant the seeds and then the grass will grow. It's going to take time, but I think it'll get there. So fingers crossed on that. But I think we're coming up on our time. Where should people go to learn more about you and your work?
I'm on LinkedIn all day, every day. So Nate Wylie on LinkedIn, at Career Hacker Nate on Instagram.
Nice. Well, Nate, can't thank you enough for sharing your insights with us on Offer Accepted. I really appreciate you spending the time. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
This episode was brought to you by Ashby. What an ATS should be. A scalable, all-in-one tool that combines powerful analytics with your ATS, scheduling, sourcing, and CRM. To never miss an episode, subscribe to our newsletter at www.ashbyhq.com/podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.